Yeah.
Okay. Did we have chapters in the other book?
The tunnel book?
Yeah, but it was just the online thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had to read that one, so it was, did you guys read it?
Wait, which one was it called?
It was the criteria.
Oh, I don't think
Well, it was part of the jigsaw, so I guess. Yeah. It was basically just how to evaluate literature about disability and what to look for and what not to look for. And it was talking about how literature with disabilities is so underrepresented in schools. So if there are books about inclusion, it's also like multiculturalism, but it's very seldom like about actual disabilities, maybe like less than 1% or something like that. And then inclusion as a whole was like 1.4% or something in the whole study that was done. That might be wrong. I don't think it's right. Then I liked how it was talking about how if students aren't exposed to stuff like this at a very young age, by the time that they do become exposed to actual people in their communities, then they just see them in a negative way or they're kind of scared. And that's why it's important to introduce them at such a young age. Because I don't remember learning about disabilities at all in elementary school.
Wait, was this in this week's?
Yeah. But it was for my jigsaw.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you sure it wasn't for next week's?
Oh my god.
But it's next week is disabilities, right?
I think
No,
so.
I'm pretty sure it's
Okay.
Because all the rest of them.
Okay.
So,
Maybe, I don't know.
let me check.
No, it was supposed to be. I think it's just like getting us ready for next week.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's funny that you bring that up because I remember my mom tells me the story of when I was like 3 or 4, and there was this man in a wheelchair. I was like, Mom, why is that man in a wheelchair? Like really loud. And she was like, why don't you go ask him? And so then I went and talked to him about it. Instead of talking about him, I like went and talked to the person. And
Oh wow, that's
like,
a good strategy.
yeah, because like my mom wanted me to learn to like talk to other people and like be respectful of them, and
Right.
so yeah, it is this week. So you're right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't know.
No. But yeah, I think it's really important to teach kids like to talk to people with disabilities because they are people, and it's really offensive when you talk about them in front of them because
They can hear you.
yeah, like how would you feel if somebody was talking about you right in front of you?
Right.
Yeah, and I think like, and I don't know if you guys took SCED 364, or not SCED, SPED. Yeah.
I knew what you were talking
Yeah,
about.
SPED
That's my
364.
favorite class.
But it's like basically an overview of like having children in your classroom with disabilities or like learning needs and things like that. But I know like they talk about using like person first language, and that's like one of the things that what you were just saying reminded me of, because like we need to recognize people as individuals before we talk about like whatever it is that they're like having to overcome to be able to like basically fit into society.
No, and I actually wrote about that in one of my posts. Which one was it? It was one of the articles, and it was could overdose of suicide statistics be hurting like people? Like they weren't using first person language at all.
No.
It was like, you know, whatever, people and like stuff, people. Like it was just all back and forth, and I was like, where's the first person language?
I know,
That's
yeah.
cool that you noticed that because I didn't notice
Yeah,
that.
I think the statistics actually took over for me, so I didn't notice that. Yeah.
That definitely came from that class. And
Yeah.
Then after that, I'm like, first person language.
Yeah.
Where is it?
Where is that?
Yeah. For my jigsaw, I was supposed to use that. I was supposed to use all of the course content to evaluate a LGBTQ. I always forget what it is. Website, but because that was about literature of disabilities, so I didn't really know. I still used it to evaluate the website, but I did the Center for Disease Control and Prevention because I thought it would be interesting to see how a website not dedicated to that community would depict information and stuff. So it started off as like most people in this community thrive at home and education, blah, 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 or whatever. And that was like 2 sentences, and then it went straight into violence, and the whole entire thing was about violence and what you can do to help. And I was like, it said nothing else about anything, and I was like, I was blown away. It was seriously like just violence. And the criteria says don't look for literature or I guess websites or information that portray other people in like a negative way or define them by their disability or like define them by what they identify with. And then I can't think of it right now. But then the other thing was to include their successes and how they strive in their community. A bunch of stuff that they didn't do. I just thought it was interesting.
That's kind of like the how to look at statistics article that we read that was like talking about like don't make lives seem so grim.
Yeah.
Like when you're talking about statistics, like don't only focus on like they live a hard life and that's probably why they anyway.
Yeah, because there was that one part in the article where it was like, if it's not directly about suicide, don't mention it.
Yeah.
And like, LGBTQIs aren't directly correlated to violence, so like, you don't have to mention it like that.
Right.
But,
Interesting.
I think like person first language could be applied to like the LGBTQIA community as well, because like being a part of that community is just like a very small portion of like your identity as like who you are, just like for anyone else, you know? Like I don't primarily identify myself as like a heterosexual or whatever, you know? Like that's not something I go around being like, yeah, like I'm heterosexual and you know, because like I'm part of the majority, so I just think it's important to remember that it's not like that gay person, it's this person who happens to be gay. Just like with people with disabilities, it's like this person who has Asperger's or things like that, you know? So that way it's like you're focusing on the individual and not like the thing that's so stigmatized about them, you know? And then like that can lead to stereotyping and things like that, and you don't want to do that, especially with your students. Like, it's just a bad idea.
Well, and I think it also, like, what you were saying earlier about, like, when you were little and you were like, why is that man in a wheelchair and stuff, I think that also, like, connects to how we separate, like, special ed students with special needs into, like, different classes. And then we're, like, not exposed to them. And then when we, like, see a person with special needs, we're like, why is that person in a wheelchair? You know what I mean? Because we're not exposed to it at all.
Yeah, that's why, like, I honestly am an advocate for, like, full inclusion in classrooms, because I think it's important for kids to be around people that are different from them, because I remember even in high school, like, the kids in the special needs class that were like separated from the general population of the school, they would go on walks around the campus because it's just like one of the things that they did. And some of them were really loud, and so people would like make fun of them. And I think that was part of that whole like separation thing, because they hadn't been like conditioned to be respectful of people with disabilities, then it didn't come automatically, or maybe they've been conditioned to be rude to people with disabilities. I don't know, but it's also like a maturity thing.
Yeah.
But I do think like if they had been around more people with disabilities earlier on, like you were saying, then it would have been better because they would have had more compassion, I think. But it's just really discouraging to see people who are like 16 or 17 years old, like making fun of someone who cannot help themselves, you know?
Right.
Like, they don't have control over what they do.
Yeah. I think it's confusing for the individual because I don't think it's necessarily their fault because they've just never been exposed to that or talked to about that, and then they're just confused. So what, like, if a person without disabilities was acting like that, they'd be like, why are you acting like that? So I think it's just confusing.
Yeah, and like not having that maturity to be able to deal with a situation like that or the experience, and then like being uncomfortable. And I feel like that's a big thing also with what we're talking about this week in the LGBTQIA community, because what happens is when people don't understand things, they're afraid of them. Well, they can be. And then they react. And some people react with violence, some people react with just like shutting down and not wanting to like talk about whatever it is that they have a problem with.
Or laughing.
Yeah, or laughing or like making fun of people. And like that's how they deal with their discomfort.
Right.
And I think like it's really important to remember that those kids are people too, and they may not have been raised in the kind of environment that's as like accepting and everything as we're used to, especially in living in a pretty like liberal community. And so I think as teachers, like that's part of our responsibility to expose kids to like all sorts of different people. And like literature is such a good way to do that, you know. And I thought that this book actually, In Our Mother's House, was really good because it talked about that explicitly, like that neighbor that was so mean, and she was like, I don't like what you are, or something like that. And the kids are like, what's the matter with this lady?
Yeah.
And like the kids were fine, you know, like her kids were pretty nice to them, I think. But like this woman was just like so homophobic. And I thought it was awesome to see how like the other members of the community like rallied around them, and they were like giving them hugs and stuff and like talking to them. And I think that's like a really important lesson for kids to learn, is like how to treat people with respect and dignity, you know.
So, short story about this actually, it totally reminds me a little bit of my boyfriend's family. I've talked to you guys about them before. And okay, so one of the reasons that they like have the views that they do is because they are Latter-day Saints. They're like Mormon, and so Jake grew up Mormon his whole life, but like broke away from that. But so when the like gay marriage laws passed, like Jake and I were both really excited and like excited for the community and stuff. But his parents were not excited about that, and because of their like religious beliefs, and it's just really hard for them to understand. And one time Jake had a conversation with them about, or just his mom about this, and she was like, this, I know this is gonna like frustrate you, but so this is imposing on my religious freedom. And Jake was like, how is this imposing on you at all? How is this imposing on your life whatsoever? And she said, well, now like people are gonna live next to me and they're gonna like live this way, and I'm not gonna be able to say what I want to say. And Jake like was super heated and said the F word, and was like, not that F word, the F word that's derogatory. And he was like, what, so you can't say? And she was like, that's not what I mean. Anyway, it was just, basically why I'm telling this is it was just really, really hard for her to like understand and comprehend, because she literally had not met anybody with this like identity, and she had never like lived near someone with this identity and had never spoken with, like, she had never experienced that, and just the way that she was raised was so hard for her to just like physically comprehend that. And so this lady like kind of reminded me of like people in that community that just like physically can't understand it. However, like I always think about like what's like the main thing in Christianity is to like live like Christ and to be loving and to be accepting, and typically that's not what happens.
Yeah, especially in regard to this issue, which is so ironic because it's like, okay, so first of all, it like explicitly says in the Bible to love your neighbor. And second of all, it is not your place to judge anyone else, you know? Like, that is not your job. And I talked about this a little bit in my post as well. And, like, coming from a family that was very liberal, even though both my parents were pastors in the ELCA church, like, I was raised to believe that like loving another person as long as they're both like adults in a consensual relationship is fine, you know, like it doesn't matter if they're male or female, you know. And I think it's hard coming from that background to really understand people like your boyfriend's mom who have been raised in like such a different like tradition and a different like mindset about like issues with the LGBTQIA community. And I remember having like conversations with my mom where like even my mom has said before, like, I don't understand like how people can be bisexual, and like I tried to have a conversation with her about it because I was taking a human sexuality class, and so I think like part of the way that we can help older generations to kind of like be a little bit more compassionate is by talking to them about these things, because we have been educated in a system that's like much more aware of the different identities that people have. And I know like my mom, she wasn't trying to be like judgmental or anything, it's just she didn't really understand it. Like she understood being gay and she understood being straight, but
she didn't understand the middle ground.
Yeah, exactly. And I tried to talk to her about like the Kinsey scale and how like very rarely are people at like one end of the spectrum or the other. Like everybody's usually like somewhere in the middle. And so like I think she understood a little bit better. But the other thing is like my mom's not the type of person that would try to take other people's like rights away from them, even if she like disagreed for some reason with like the way that they lived. She's not going to be like, oh, like, you shouldn't be able to get married because I don't agree with, like, what you're doing and everything. So I think that's when it becomes, like, a really big issue is when you're not understanding something that leads to you acting out in a way that's violent, whether that's, like, with words or with actions. And, like, second of all, when you're, like, trying to basically impose yourself on a situation that has nothing to do with you.
Yeah. That was my problem about the whole, like when that woman refused to give the marriage license to the gay couple this summer. Do you guys remember that?
No.
What was her name?
I don't remember her name, but she was like religious and she was like signing marriage licenses, and she refused to sign one for a gay couple.
Mm-hmm. It was in Rowan County. Okay, her name was Kim Davis.
Oh yeah, Kim Davis.
And I'm pretty sure it was like some southern state.
Yeah, it was in the South. Because
Yeah.
it was when I was traveling to North
Kentucky.
Carolina, and I saw it on the news, and I was like, crap.
Yeah.
I was at the airport like, oh my gosh, crap. And then we went to North Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
and Jake and I like put on our adult hats, and we went to church with
Yeah.
his grandma, and the whole church was talking about it, and it was like, I had a huge problem with this because they were saying that it was imposing on her religious freedom. and which I totally disagree with, because if she feels uncomfortable in any way, she's not the only person who's signing marriage licenses.
Yeah.
She could call somebody from the back. She
Yep.
could ask them to do it.
Yeah.
That's fine. She could say, come back in a few hours. Like, she's not the only person that is doing that. It's not imposing on your religious freedom whatsoever. Your religious freedom says that you can practice your religious freedom. It doesn't say that other people can't practice their own life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and she's a government employee, so she needs to get over that really fast.
Yeah.
Like, I just thought that was ridiculous. So
For me,
frustrating.
that kind of brings up a point like I've been having a question about is like, obviously we're gonna have a lot of parents who don't agree with these topics, and I feel like even just like with holidays, like we can't celebrate Christmas in the classroom anymore because of people's religious beliefs. We can't sometimes even celebrate Valentine's Day in some schools. Like, what are we supposed to do if a parent says it imposes on their religious beliefs? And like we've made accommodations for them in other aspects. But, like, when do we draw the line of, like, I'm sorry, I can't accommodate you for your religious beliefs?
I have no idea.
But also, like, this book is really just about being respectful and kind to other people. It doesn't mean you have to agree with, like,
That's true.
who they are or understand it. It just means you have to be kind to them.
That could be
And I'm pretty sure that does not conflict with anyone's religious beliefs, being kind to other people. So, that would be a really good money question. Like, how do you deal with that in a classroom? Because it's like, it's such an important thing to be able to use this kind of literature to make people feel more accepted and like give them more of an understanding of the people around them. But like, there are those people that are really like bigoted and like homophobic, and they're not going to want you to read a book about like two mothers and children, even though this is like the best book ever. Like, it's so well rounded, it's so well thought out, and it doesn't do anything to like, it's not like preachy, it's more like, this is a family.
Yeah.
You know, these two mothers love each other. This is a family, and they are happy together, so why is this neighbor being so mean to them, you know? And like, the kids in the story are like, I don't get it, you know? And so I think it's important to kind of bring up those issues.
Yeah. Especially if, like, you can include literature like this, but what if you have an actual family with two moms or two dads?
Yeah.
It's a very different dynamic, and, like, what does it do to the kid if another kid says, well, my parents don't agree with your family, and you just have no idea why?
Yeah.
The one thing I'm thinking is, and I don't really like this answer, but is maybe just having it in your classroom and not reading it. But I still don't like that answer because I think it should be, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about this all week. I was like, how do you do that? Like, how do you incorporate this? But then, like, there are always going to be people who will take issue with what you do, you know? And unfortunately, this is one of the things that, like, people get really heated about, and they, like, take issue with other people trying to basically, like, teach their kids to have compassion, which I don't really understand.
Yeah.
But,
I was just gonna say, by the time we become teachers, it'll be different, but it won't be.
Yeah.
So soon.
I know.
I was thinking like 10 years from now, but it's like next year.
Yeah, right?
It's so weird.
Oh my gosh.
It's freaking me out.
Yeah.
And what I really liked about this book is like right away, I didn't really pay attention to the fact that there were two moms. They looked so happy
I
in
know,
the
the
pictures, and I like
grades
thought
and
of my own
things.
family. And I like how there wasn't too much emphasis on it, but it was just like, hey, this family looks very different from mine, but
They're happy.
but at the same time, they look just as normal as any other family that I've ever seen. But my window was that all of the kids were adopted, and I have such a huge family and like such strong ties with them, and just my background that I couldn't imagine being adopted and just not knowing that. And I feel like I would go through like a lot of internal conflict, just always wondering.
Yeah, I think that's interesting though, because like all the kids were adopted in their infancy, And so, like, this is the family that they know and that they love. And, like, I thought it was awesome to see how, like, the extended family came over and they, like, made gnocchi together and, like, did a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite things was how they described the moms and how they were so different from each other, but yet they were still in love and they worked together really well. And I just think that's interesting. And that's something anybody can relate to, you know, even if you have a mom and a dad, or two dads or anything, you know, just like these are human beings and we all are complex and interesting and we all have things that are different about us, but that doesn't mean that that has to be like the most important thing to pay attention to, you know?
The one thing that I really enjoyed was when they were having the like block party, and there was so much culture at the block party. Like they talked about all the different foods that people brought and stuff from like their different cultures, which I really enjoyed. But the one thing that I kept thinking was like, how are these adopted kids? How like will they cope with like their identity being adopted, like not knowing like exactly? I mean, and maybe they do know exactly where they came from, but you know what I mean? Like, how will they cope with like their cultural identity in that way?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Actually,
Sarah.
yeah, we should write that down. Because, like, as a child adopted by two mothers who are white and you're a person of color, like, how do you preserve the culture of, like, your birth parents? Or do you like, create a new culture with, like...
Which one is it more...
Is that the same with like any adopted child?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
I thought you were specifically saying just because they had two moms. I was.
Oh, no, no.
Okay.
No, just because, like, having, like, parents who are white and, like, not being white, like, it just seems like it would... Well, obviously... You'd have people that would ask you questions like, why are your moms white? Or, you know, things like that. And, like, I wonder if, I don't know, it seems like the parents would have talked to them about it, though.
Yeah.
Like, it seemed like they were pretty open in dialogue with their kids and things like that. So, obviously didn't include that in here because that wasn't, like, the main, like, thing of the story. But I think it would be interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it can also be vice versa, though. I like as well. Like,
Oh, yeah.
a family of color could adopt just like another, like a different
Yeah, exactly.
family of color, and
Yeah.
or a white child.
Yeah, and I've heard about people who, like from mixed families that have a mom or a dad who is a person of color, and then the mom or dad is white, and like sometimes they'll look more white than they do like then they look like a person of color, and then they have people like I've heard of people like asking moms in the like grocery store like, whose baby is that? It's like, this is my baby. Like, what are you talking about? You know? And like I wonder how you would deal with that, because you still identify as a person of color because that's part of who you are.
Right.
But even if you don't look like it, you know, and that reminds me of the Blacker the Berry,
Oh,
and the girl that like she looked white but she
Yeah.
wasn't, and well she was partially, but that wasn't like what she identified as,
Right.
and so I just think it's like a fine line because I don't know, you don't want to assume anything, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I think that was one of Joya's biggest points this week. Like, you cannot assume anything about your students
Yeah.
and stuff. Like in the class that you have, you can't assume that their parents are white. You can't assume that their parents are both like are male and female, like that kind of thing. And I feel like I struggle with that because I'm
Yeah.
always like, oh, what do your mom and dad do?
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's because I grew up with that. Like, what do your parents do? What does your guardian do? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. That's called heteronormativity because
Right.
it's yeah. So heteronormativity is when you assume that people are heterosexual, like parents are, you know, anyone really, and it's because our culture is has so long been defined by like heterosexual couples that people just like assume that other people are heterosexual, and that's not an okay thing to do, you know. But it's one of those things that's really hard to get over, especially if you're raised in a family that had like I had heterosexual parents. You know, just kind of realizing like, oh, there are other people that have like different family structures than I do, and I think that's where like books like this are really important, because for kids who like aren't exposed to that on like TV or in their neighborhoods or things like that, it's important to know that there are other people out there that like aren't the same as your parents, but that doesn't mean that they're any like less qualified to be parents.
And that's why I kind of liked this book. It's Heather Has Two Mommies. And basically it's just this little girl who's talking about her parents, and then she goes to preschool, and then they're like, all the kids are like talking about their dads, and she's like, wait, I don't have a dad. And then she's like, am I the only one who doesn't have a dad?
Mm-hmm.
And like the teacher goes over and she's like, no, not everyone has a mom, not everyone has a dad.
Mm-hmm.
And so like they just go through all the like we make a family. And some person does have a mom and dad, someone just has a mom, someone just has a dad. Someone had two dads, but like it was like a mom who remarried.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just like all the different family dynamics. And
I didn't even think about a kid having two moms or two dads, not knowing that the other exists.
Yeah.
That's kind of crazy.
And the reason I also like this because it was a little bit different. I mean, obviously it's like two women, but one of the moms did have her. Like it wasn't just adopted. Like she was, like she had her, and so I thought it was just like another perspective of like, just because you have two parents of the same, you know, gender, like you don't have to be adopted. Like, you know.
Yeah.
So
That's interesting. Did you know that we all picked our same choice, but
Yeah.
I
Are
was
you
like,
serious?
how did that happen? That's so funny.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so that
You
was.
haven't read it before, have you?
I've never read it before this week. I just looked up LGBTQIA
That's
books.
nice.
Yeah. So, yeah, I thought it was cute. And I thought it would be a good way to introduce the topic of same-sex couples. But also, I was like, they're animals. So this is conflicting because, like, it's kind of cute, you know, and it's like, it's done in a respectful way, you know, but also, like, it's one thing to, like, I don't know, to, like, look at two penguins that are together, another thing to look at two people who are together, and, like, sometimes, I think I said this in my post, sometimes we have more compassion for animals than we do for other human beings, which is so sad, but it's true.
I just thought of it. Is it like degrading that it was about animals?
I don't think so. I think it's just trying to show that, like,
Even animals are
exactly. It reminded me, okay, this is kind of on a tangent, but it reminded me of Parks and Rec. Have any of you guys watched that? Okay, so Leslie Knope, the main character, she, like, unwittingly marries two gay penguins at the zoo, and she didn't know that they
Is
were
it Amy
both
Poehler?
males. What?
Is it Amy Poehler?
Yeah, it's Amy Poehler. And so she, like, she didn't know, and so somebody from the zoo, like, tells her, and then there's, like, this, like, LGBT activist group that, like, comes to her, and they're like, yeah, like, you're, like, behind gay marriage, and you're, like, really for our community.
She was like,
And
going for
she's
it.
like, okay, like, whatever you say. And then she has this person from, like, it's something like the Preservation of Families, or I don't, some silly name like that, where she comes and she's like, you need to annul this marriage. Because, like, it's not okay that you, like, marry these two gay penguins. And think about the message it sends to our children and our community.
Oh my
And,
God.
yeah, it's just ridiculous.
That's
But that
so
reminded me so much of this book. Like, I was
Wait,
just
so
like,
that episode
oh.
came out after this was written?
I don't know.
Well, this was written, or the book book was published in 2005.
Oh,
I think it might have been around the same time, actually. I'll have to look that up. But yeah, I just thought it was funny because it is kind of like symbolic, I guess.
Yeah.
But still at the same time, you want to be careful with things like that because you don't want kids to just like assume like, oh well, like I don't know, just because it's animals doesn't mean that human beings can be this
Yeah.
way.
I think it does. Like, I really like the underlying message and how just like, if you care for something enough, it doesn't matter what you are. But I was just thinking about the past readings we've done and how you have to look for certain literature that depicts people of color as like living a really hard life or just seen in a negative light or a negative light. And like, I think this book is really cute, but I don't know. I just thought of this like, does it say something if we have to depict a homosexual couple as animals?
Yeah.
That's a really good question.
I mean, I don't think it does. I don't think the author meant to do that.
No,
but
I
I'm just.
don't think that was the intention. But
Do you guys know what I mean?
I
Yeah.
totally do.
Yeah.
Like how in the past, like Jews have been portrayed with like really large noses,
Yeah.
or African Americans were portrayed as monkeys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like I think it might almost tie into that,
Mhm.
but I don't know if it does.
Yeah, I just think it's such a fine line,
Yeah.
between being inclusive and kind of a sweet story about animals to being exclusive and offensive, but I think this book was done in a way that made it so it wasn't
Yeah.
offensive.
I mean, personally, I don't think so, but I just.
yeah,
I was trying to.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, that is interesting though to think about.
I probably wouldn't take it that way. Like, I mean, I kind of think of like Mouse on the Motorcycle almost, how it's like a mouse and like this boy. And it's kind of almost talking about diversity in a sense, where like all the family members are like, oh no, don't associate with humans because like we don't know anything about them. But then like the mouse and like the boy become like best friends, and it's like this cute thing. And it's like it's kind of just like integrating. It doesn't matter what you are.
Yeah.
It's just like the personality that you have. And so, like, it's not saying, oh, these mice are anything less than this human, because, like, it's just a different perspective.
Yeah.
And, like, I kind of see what you mean by, like, viewing them as animals. I think it's just, like, it doesn't matter
Yeah.
what you are.
Yeah. I think it's the difference between a story about animals and a story about human beings who are portrayed as animals.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
I
because
did-
does.
I hear say that one more time. I didn't
Okay,
get it here.
so it's the difference between having a book that's about animals and a book that involves portraying human beings
Yes.
as animals.
Yeah.
Because if the point is that you're trying to make human beings look less than, then that's a problem, But I think if it's about like a relationship between two penguins and how this like brought the community together kind of over this thing, and like I don't know, I just feel like it's okay if it's done in a way that's respectful, and it's done in a way that isn't like too preachy, because that was one of the things in the article that I read this week that like looking at LGBTQIA literature and like quality literature doesn't try to like preach a message over and over again. It subtly like intertwines it in the story, and because like the bottom line is you want children to see people from the community as people and as people who are
Like similar to you.
yeah,
like
similar to you
relate
that you can identify with, not like these people are really different from us. Like, let's capitalize on how different these people are from us, instead of looking at the similarities. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. One thing I was gonna say about the Penguin book is, did you know that it's a real story? It was true.
Yeah.
But then shortly after the book was published, that one of the penguins found a female and left.
That is so depressing.
I know, because I was thinking, like, while I was reading it, I was like, I wonder if there have been instances in the wild where, like, animals have, like, been attracted to the same sex and, like, lived together for, like, ever.
Yeah.
Because I've never heard of that.
I know that there are a lot of animals who are attracted.
Yeah.
I think.
There are also animals that like don't have a preference.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I don't know. I took a biological anthropology class, and we were talking about like baboons and some other member of the primate species, and how they just like, okay, this is really crude, but they just love having sex, so they have sex with basically whomever. Like, they're one of the most, like, sexual animals that there are. And so I think it's like, it happens, you know? Like, it's not that it doesn't happen with animals, it's just that we, like, don't recognize it as much, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, so I had that, like, wondering, and then so I did some, like, research about the book, and I was like, oh my gosh, it was true about these penguins, and then I get to the bottom, and I was like, oh.
It's so depressing. That, like, makes the whole story almost irrelevant.
I know.
Wait, was it true that they brought an egg over?
Okay.
So they had a baby together, and I don't really know what happened to the baby, because if one of them, like, split off and found a female baby.
Well, I think they raised the baby, though, before.
Well, I mean, usually in the wild, like, the parents switch off anyways.
Yeah.
Oh.
Like, once the baby is, like, the dad taking care of it, and the mom will, like,
Yeah.
get some food, and then they'll
And
switch
then
off.
the dad
And so
will
there's
take
usually
care.
only one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's so sad. Man.
Sorry to be a
I
downer.
wanted Roy and Silo to be a forever couple. But
They have the cutest names.
I know. And Tango.
Takes two to
Yeah. So, I don't know. I thought it was an interesting book.
It was, yeah. Can we talk about Aristotle?
Oh my gosh, I love that book. It was so good. And it was such a quick read too,
I know.
because it looks like it's long, but in the pages it's mostly like dialogue, so it doesn't actually like take that long to read. And when I started reading this book, I was like, oh yeah, that's a really good book. Like maybe I would have this in my like classroom if it were like 5th grade class or something. And I was like, oh my gosh, the language, I cannot include this in my classroom.
And they're smoking pot.
Yeah,
I was
like,
like, maybe high
drinking.
school, like
Right?
senior
Yeah,
year.
right. I was like, maybe middle school? No, let's do this in high school. Yeah. But I thought it was a really good book.
It was so good. It was so realistic. That's what I loved about it. Like, I was like, okay, for sure, I can picture these two guys.
Yeah.
Like, in high school, like, it was so
It
realistic.
didn't sugarcoat growing up either. Just
Oh,
like
I
with all
know.
the experimenting and everything and.
Yeah.
I was telling Natalie the other day, like, I didn't know what this week's topic was about when I read the book. And so it was very interesting just to, like, go through the book and I'm just like, oh, this is a story about their lives. And, like, to develop it, like, for it to develop, like, into their relationship. It was just, like, a really cool thing, like, almost not knowing what our topic was about, just to see it in a different perspective.
Yeah.
Well, and I didn't even know if, like, Ari was gonna be gay
Yeah,
until
I
the very
didn't.
end. I was like, oh, like, because like, towards the middle, I was like, maybe they'll, like, both be gay and they'll end up together. And then I kept reading and I was like, you know what, maybe this is just a story about Dante being gay and, like Ari, like, just being his friend and supporting him. And then I got to the end, I was like, yay, they end up together.
Yeah, I know.
I kind of talked about, like, when I didn't know, like, if Ari was gonna, like, what if he was gay or not. I was like, at the beginning of the book, I was kind of almost hoping he wasn't, just so it could be about, like, that friend relationship of, like, you know, you can be friends like this on that kind of level, and it's like, it doesn't have to be stigmatized that, like, you have to be gay in order to have this relationship. But then, like, I got to the end, and I was like, no, I love romance. I want but, like, there was, like, that read, I was just like, you know, I feel like if young like boys or even girls read this book, they're like, oh, that type of relationship, like, you know, only because you're gay. And so
Yeah.
there was kind of that feeling that I had when reading this book, but I love romance so much.
Yeah.
I did. This might be TMI, but in 8th grade, I had a friend who was a lesbian, and she was like my best friend, and we got really, really close. And like, I feel like your lesbian best friend is always gonna have a crush on you. Like, I don't know. That's from my experience, and with what other friends have told me. It's just kind of always happened. But that might not be for everyone. So that does make a lot of sense. So I guess if a kid was reading this and experiencing this, they'd probably think they might come to the conclusion that it's true, but it's not true for everyone.
Right.
But there we go. I just think it's really interesting that it's so that.
Yeah. I know, I've never thought about that before. Because, like, typically when you're, like, dating someone, they are your best friend. Like, you talk to them about everything. You have, like, a very similar relationship that Ari and Dante had. So, if you just happen to be best friends with someone who was gay, like, could they avoid...
It's so...
Especially, like, in the book when Ari didn't tell Dante that he liked him. Like, Dante was like, I can't be your friend anymore. Like, I mean...
Well, think about it. Also think about it, like, from a heterosexual perspective is what I'm trying to do. Like, if I was absolutely best friends with a boy, I'd probably, like, fall in love with him because we were best friends. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think though, like we can't eliminate the possibility that people just want to be friends too, because I know that I had a friend who was guy in high school, like middle school and high school, and he admitted to me later on that he had like a really big crush on me when we were first like getting to know each other. And I did too, but then, like, as we became better friends, I kind of saw, like, I guess the qualities that I, like, really didn't like about him.
Yeah.
So it could happen, but it's, like, I think, like, having that attraction to, like, whomever it is, like, if you are attracted to the opposite sex, or if you are attracted to the same sex, or both, like, it's always just going to be, like, a fine line of, like, making yourself, like, known and, like, identifying with who you are as an individual and letting that person know that. And, like, just not assuming things, I guess, if that makes sense. You know?
One of my friends, like really good friends in high school, came out as gay maybe like 2 months before we graduated. And he was like getting ready to go away to college, and he was gonna like room with another guy. And so when he came out, one of the reasons that he says that he came out was because before he graduated was because he wanted to know how everybody would react. And he said that he didn't know if people like would still accept him if he was gay, but he just wanted to know. He was like, if I would have graduated before I came out, like I feel like I would have regretted it because I wouldn't have known like who my true friends in high school were, kind of thing. And so anyway, so he came out and he was like getting ready to go to college, and the guy that he was gonna room with like totally backed out. He was like, I can't live with you because you're gay, and basically like I'm afraid to live with you. And anyway, like left him like all alone, and he ended up having to get like a 1-bedroom apartment by himself because it was like so last minute and stuff. And I just like wonder where that like scared feeling comes from. And I think it's like kind of what we were saying before, like people just aren't exposed to it anymore. If like coming out wasn't such that like a big deal, then maybe he wouldn't have done that. You know what I mean? Maybe he wouldn't have backed out of that living situation.
Yeah, and if people didn't have like I guess the assumption that, like, I don't know, I remember this being an issue in like locker rooms and stuff like that when like people would come out and like there was a guy who came out in my middle school and the other guys were like, oh, I don't want him changing in the same space as me, like he's gonna look at me. And I think just like remembering that these people are people too.
Yeah. They're not like gonna fall in love with
Yeah,
everyone.
exactly. And
Right.
like I think it's funny because there's like this stereotype or about like gay men trying to turn straight guys gay or something like that, you know, like I don't know if you've heard that, but like I think it's just like why does it have to be compromising to your masculinity to be friends with a gay man?
Right.
You know, because if you're
Right.
comfortable in yourself, then that shouldn't matter.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, I don't know, it's just weird.
I had this friend in like middle school who she lived with two moms, and I remember like her telling me like I have two moms, and it was like a big deal for her, and I was like, okay,
Yeah.
that's cool, you know. But I remember her being like, it's just like really hard for me to tell people that, and I was like, okay, like I understand it. But she in the past had friends who like weren't allowed to be friends with her anymore because, and this was a parent's like explanation, because they were afraid to send their daughters over there
Yeah.
for like, I don't know, like molestation.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's not like when you send, yeah. And it's not like when you send like someone to a straight family, you're like afraid
Yeah.
that your child will be molested.
Yeah.
So why is that different?
I've
There's
heard
such
that
a
before.
disconnect
Mhm.
with like, and like I've told you guys before, like my community was not the best community to like grow up in because it was so like that. There were just all of these like ideas that were being perpetuated that were so untrue.
But yeah,
Have
I've
you
heard
guys
that
heard
stereotype.
that?
Yeah. Like people think that a gay couple, like being a gay couple and wanting to adopt a child is bad because they're gonna like do something to the child, or yeah, like no joke, like this is a thing that people think, and it's like no, like not being straight doesn't mean that you're a pedophile.
Yeah.
Like that's not how it works.
Right.
People just
I was having this conversation the other day with a coworker, and just that whole slippery slope thing, and like just because gay marriage is legal now, like people are like, oh, pretty soon it's gonna be legal to marry babies, and it's like, no, that's never gonna happen.
Yeah.
Or, like it just all of this stuff that comes into other people's minds
I
from
know.
what this could lead to, and it's just like ridiculous.
Yeah. And like they act like it's like the gateway into like
Everything.
yeah, into everything, and like people are like, why don't I just marry my dog? Or like marry my
Yeah.
car or blah blah blah, and it's like no. Because like this is a relationship between two consenting adults
Right.
that have feelings for each other and want to have the same rights
Yeah.
as a heterosexual couple, and you can't deprive them of that just because you think that their identity as a member of the LGBTQI community is wrong. Like, you can't do that.
Right. I liked what Ari said in the book. He was like, there are worse things
Yeah.
that people can do than to like the
Oh,
same
yeah.
sex.
Yeah.
I was like, go Ari.
Yeah,
Yes.
right? Like, at the very end when he was like, why would I be ashamed of loving Dante? And, oh, yeah, it's so good. Oh my gosh, I love that book. I was reading it, I was like, oh, feelings.
I totally want to, I think I said this in my post, I totally want to read this book with my kids or have
Oh
them
my
read
gosh,
it or
yeah.
like talk to them about it
Yeah.
and stuff.
It's funny because, like, to be honest, this is probably a book I would have read in elementary school just because, like, my reading level was ridiculous. like my parents would have to find books for me. Like I read things by like Bill Bryson, who's like who's like very potty mouthed and like crass, and my parents were just like, go for it, you're reading a book, that's all I care about. And the thing is, like, for kids who are like mature enough to read things like this when they're younger, I think it's like a really, really good book to be able to read,
Yeah.
because then you're still being exposed to issues that are so important to know about, even if like society doesn't think you're ready for them, you know. And like the worst thing in this book is the language, you know. And like the mom is constantly saying like, don't use that language. So it's not like it's like, yay, cussing, like everybody just like curse all over the place. Like it's like there's a time and a place for that.
And also to be a teen and like to be going through so much internal conflict and to read about all of his internal conflict in such a real way, I thought it was really relatable. And at the same time, like I'm graduating next year, so I feel like I'm almost going through this whole cycle all over again of being like 15, but now I'm 22, and I just
Do you need to go to work?
um,
Need to wrap it up.
no, I got today off.
Okay.
So one thing that I wanted to say about this book was I loved the internal struggle that they went through about their Mexican identity.
Yeah.
To like,
Both.
I loved that.
That was really interesting.
Well, and because like, there's been like some issues like with the Mexican community, like about homophobia, like also like with African American culture, like with being like homophobic and stuff. And I liked that they wrestled with that and talked about this in this book.
Because like there are cultures that are very like they pride themselves on masculinity, and especially like patriarchal cultures, and so I think it was really interesting to see how their like identity as Mexicans, it like didn't really affect obviously like how they felt about each other, and how their parents were both so supportive, like so supportive, and like the parents knew basically before they did that like they had feelings for each other.
I love how close they were.
Yeah, definitely. And I thought it was great to see like for me, it kind of was a little bit of a glimpse into Mexican American culture and how like tight knit families are. And I think it's really important also for that reason. Like this book is a really good book because it like has those family ties and the relationships between different members of the family, and different family dynamics. Like his brother's in prison, his sisters are much older than him. Like I just think it'd be a really good book for like kids who are going through that, especially at like the middle school or high school level, because it's like they have this voice that they can like relate to, and you know that like they're not the only ones, you know. And I don't know, it seems like a really important book just because of all the different family dynamics that are shown and all the different situations that are going on in this kid's life, and like seeing that he could overcome that, and especially like with the help of his friend and like who he ends up liking, and I just think it's really cool.
So before we end, we need one more page. Do we need three?
Yeah.
Oh, we don't.
Oh, I think it's preferred, but
She said we could have up to 3.
Okay.
well,
Can we push one
we
out?
can-
yeah, I think so. I guess we could ask, like, with young adult fiction books, do we make those available in our classroom? Like this one?
Yeah.
Or, I mean, I think they have them in the library, to be honest, even at the elementary level, but I'm not sure because of all the censorship that goes into, like, selecting books for schools.
Yeah, I don't know about this one. I kind
Yeah.
of want to look because I work at Burlington Edison High School, and I kind of want to look there and see if they
Yeah.
have that.
Yeah, that'd be a good
Because
idea.
they usually have some like laid out.
Yeah.
Like, you may be interested in these.
Yeah.
I mean, it really also depends on your students and their maturity level, so maybe even just having them aside and being like recommending them to
Yeah.
kids who you think are ready.
Or like having a list put together and they can go to the public library
Yeah,
and check
that-
them out or things like that, because I know that's what my parents did with me as a kid, because I was kind of like past the like picture books and like simple chapter books at a certain point. They like took me to the library and were like, here, read this, read this, read this, you know? And my mom would like actively look up young adult fiction books for me to read, but not everyone's parents have time to do that or the ability to do that, so yeah.
I don't remember reading such hard books in like fourth grade, but I'm in a fifth grade class right now, and they're reading Harry Potter and just like books that I was reading in like middle school, and
Yeah.
they're so little.
Yeah.
Well, and they're starting to read a lot earlier now, like in kindergarten and
That's
stuff.
true, yeah.
And I remember getting to my first day of first grade and being like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna learn how to read this year. Like,
I know.
so excited. And my teacher asked us all, like, what are you most excited to learn today or this year? And my kid like, shut up. I was like, I'm excited to learn how to read.
Yeah.
But I remember this girl behind me, this is like traumatizing, I still remember it.
Aw.
And she goes, you don't know how to read yet? And I was like,
Yeah. Like very nice.
I was like, oh my god. And I still remember who it is. She actually goes here to Western.
What? Dude.
I know.
You should confront her. Dude. You ruined my childhood.
Ruined my life. I now read really hard.
Yeah.